Marshall Clarfeld is an ancient aliens researcher and believes that human beings were genetically engineered by an extraterrestrial race called the Anunnaki 250,000 years ago. He is the author of Adam the Missing Link, Gilgamesh 10, and his latest, The Anunnaki Were Here. You can learn more about Marshall Clarfeld by visiting adamthemissinglink.com. Marshall, I recently had Michael Tellinger on the show, where he discussed his discovery of the ruins of the Anunnaki gold mines in South Africa. You believe you have found an Anunnaki gold mining operation in Colorado.
Well, there are two of them in the United States that I researched, Russell. One is the ruins in New Mexico, Chaco Canyon, Pueblo Bonito, and the one in Colorado is Mesa Verde. I've analyzed in my book, The Anunnaki Were Here, were gold mining sites built by the Anunnaki to harvest gold from placer water. Placer water is river water that is stripping gold from the veins upstream and bringing it down in the form of suspended particles. These particles can be separated out, since gold is 19 times heavier than water, by bumping it and collecting it in a washboard fashion. Most of the 49ers who went up to California either used pans or sluice boxes, which had washboard bottoms in them. In the book, I also referred to about 14 other pyramid-type structures like Chichen Itza and Machu Picchu, which were built, I believe, by the Anunnaki to collect the gold from the rivers that were close by. If you were to look at a washboard, you see that the surfaces are irregular, and if the water flows over these irregular surfaces and bumps against the gold, it drops into the slots and is collected later. My newest theory, which is in the fourth book that I'm currently writing, Russell, I've discovered that there was an ancient Greek myth called Jason and the Argonauts, and it was in the pursuit of the golden fleece. And I discovered that golden fleece meant that they took sheepskin and put it in the placer water, and the gold collected in the fleece. And that was where when it turned gold, they took it out, let it dry, and they had the gold. So my assumption is that the fleece of sheep were used on the surfaces, the flat surfaces of these washboard terraces. Like if you look at Machu Picchu from the air, you'll see that it's covered totally with sculptured terraces in all directions. And as the water flowed over these terraces, and if the horizontal surfaces were covered with fleece, the gold would collect on those surfaces and could be easily retrieved. So my theory is going forward with a new twist to it called the golden fleece.
So all ancient pyramids were used to separate the gold from the water?
Not all of them. I can't prove that all of them, but the ones that I picked out, like Planeke, Chichen Itza, the Great Pyramid, and Tiwanaku, there are many sites that I analyzed had placer gold. You have to have the water nearby or you can't do it. The sites that I associated with that, Russell, were in the book, those that had the river water that could be used to separate the gold. And now the Great Pyramid, the Nile River, when it floods, strips gold out of the Nubian mountains where the gold deposits are. That's south of the Mediterranean. The Nile River flows from south to north. And as it passed by the site of the Great Pyramid, the water was diverted into a dam. They actually had a dam around the base of that Great Pyramid, and the water level then could be brought up to the entrance, which is not at ground level. As we know, it's about 36 feet above ground. And once the water was elevated to the entrance, it goes screaming down the 26-angle shaft. There's a 4x4 shaft that's at the entrance, goes down to the pit, which is below the pyramid. This shaft was drilled through solid granite to the pit, and it's watertight. And then there's a pulse generator in the pit that sends the water back up into the Grand Gallery, which is an upside-down washboard, and then up into the King's Chamber. And if you note, as many researchers have, all the chambers in the Great Pyramid and the tunnels are watertight. And there had to be a reason to go to that extra effort to make them watertight. And the evidence that I bring forward in the book, Russell, is that the big stone sarcophagus, which is found in the king's chamber, with nothing in it, of course, there was never found Pharaoh's remains or anything, has got damages on all the outside edges. If you look at it carefully, and I show that in my book with a very clear picture, the damage that occurred to the edges and the top and the bottom and the sides of that was that it floated. When the water came into the king's chamber, that, according to Archimedes' principle, will float. That box will float, and it'll bang randomly around inside the chamber, chipping at the edges. And I think what actually caused it to fail, one corner has been chipped down to the point where the water came into the box and it sunk. That's my analysis of what the original purpose of the Great Pyramid was. It goes against everybody else's theories. I know I'm sticking my neck out on this one, Russell, but I'm pretty much convinced, and I detailed it in the last chapter of the Anunnaki Were Here, how it worked, and I'm challenging the scientific community to prove that I'm wrong.
You're sticking your neck out, as you say, and you consider yourself a disciple of Zecharia Sitchin.
Yes, that is correct.
If I may say, there is no record of Sitchin having anything but a journalism degree. What makes him qualified, and then how does that make you qualified?
Okay, let's talk about what the results of Sitchin's work were first, Russell. Sitchin produced over 15 books, very scholarly books, that have been challenged by many people, but have stood strong, and I stand behind them. And my credentials are that I am a graduate engineer from Caltech, but that doesn't qualify me in ancient history at all. And Sitchin's degrees didn't qualify him either, as did Einstein didn't have qualifications to produce what he produced. So it doesn't take a lot of imagination to understand that people can have insights into history or physics or mathematics without a lot of degrees behind them. Those that have the degrees and claim that they're experts, I question that they aren't just trying to ride on Sitchin's popularity. He's a very popular author, and I, for 60 years after I graduated from Caltech in 1951, was pursuing the truth of where we came from, Russell. And I think that's a big question that needs to be answered. And once I found Sitchin's theory, and I read all of his books, and they're very, very difficult to read. And actually, I had a 10-year relationship with Sitchin on the phone and in person and in letters. I think that his theory is the correct theory, and I don't think that there's a database any larger than the cuneiform tablets and the cylinder seals that have been found in the Sumerian civilization that he revealed to us. I mean, it's amazing that someone finally figured out who the Sumerians were, where they came from, and what happened to them. Nobody before in history of archaeology or anthropology has been able to figure out where the Sumerians came from. All of a sudden, 6,000 years ago, they appear, and they have writing, and they have music, and they have literature and religion. And they said everything they had was given to them by this race called the Anunnaki. And I think that the cylinder seals are probably the most beautiful evidence of technology transfer. Are you familiar with the cylinder seals?
No.
Cylinder seals about the size of a wine bottle cork, maybe a little smaller. It's made out of hematite. Hematite is a stone that is as hard as steel. And on the smooth cylinder surface of these cylinder seals were engraved in the negative pictures, so that when you rolled this little stone seal over wet clay, it made a positive image. And these images are in the British Museum. There's over 2,000-3,000 of the cylinder seals, and the British Museum has 120,000 cuneiform tablets, which they pilfered from the sands of Iraq. They really belong to that country. It's their history. But it's actually the story of the Sumerian civilization, who had high-rise buildings. They had streets laid out in perfect squares and writing, and they left the cylinder seals and the high-rise buildings, and it was amazing civilization. They had all the first. They had the wheel, as I said, astronomy, astrology, religion, writing, and nobody's really ever explained how hunter-gatherers, farmers more or less, came into all of these technological firsts 6,000 years ago. And I think we owe a great debt of gratitude to Zecharia Sitchin for uncovering and translating and revealing to us the history of the Sumerians, which was a civilization that apparently coexisted, lived side by side with the Anunnaki, which was an extraterrestrial species that came to this planet according to their records. And they had a personal relationship. My second book, Gilgamesh 10, I portray what it was like, Russell, 4,600 years ago, to be living in Uruk, which was the capital city of Sumer, and have these advanced beings in your presence. It's quite a fascinating story. In fact, the Epic of Gilgamesh is the first story ever recorded on this planet, and it's written on 12 cuneiform tablets, and it tells the story of a misfit king. He was a hybrid. His mother was an Anunnaki queen, and his father was human. Therefore, he was a bicameral species. He was part human, part Anunnaki, and he was about 9 feet tall, like they were. And he's rattling around in this place that they made him the king of, called Uruk. In fact, it's the first action hero story, since it was the first story, that tells of his adventures seeking immortality. It's a fascinating story. You should read it.
I'm going to disagree with you about the nationalization of antiquities. I think that leads to things like what happened with Zawi Hawass in Egypt. Antiquities should belong to all people of the earth.
I agree. I agree with that. I think that the British Museum and all the other countries, the Germans and even other museums, should return the artifacts to the country of the origin. They belong to those people. They don't belong in museums of other countries. I agree.
Gold is extremely rare throughout the universe and can only be created as a byproduct of catastrophic cosmic events such as the collision of two neutron stars. When these two massive heavenly bodies collide, they emit gamma-ray bursts that spew out this newly formed gold, and we are left to chip it out of the rock and sift it from the waters. You can't turn lead into gold, and it can't be made synthetically. So gold is precious stuff, but why was it precious to the Anunnaki?
Okay, according to the stories, now this is all information that comes from the translation of the cuneiform tablets. In other words, they wrote that the Anunnaki came to this planet 400,000 years ago in the pursuit of gold because their planet, which is the 10th planet in our solar system, I believe, was losing its atmosphere. They had created a gigantic ozone leak in their atmosphere, and if you take a planet that goes so far from the sun as theirs does, you need your atmosphere to preserve life in all its forms. So the only thing that they found, apparently, to seal up or to heal up the ozone leak were powdered flakes of gold. And they didn't have much gold on their planet, so they sought in the solar system that they were captured into a planet that had the gold, and they found Earth, had it. So they came here to extract the gold and take it back to their home planet and powder it and inject it into the ozone layer of their atmosphere to reflect the sun out and heal the loss of their atmosphere. It was a survival plan, actually. They were destined to be doomed if they couldn't close their ozone leak. They tried, according to the cuneiform stories, many different methods to seal up the ozone leak, but none of them worked. And finally, gold did work, and gold apparently has that ability. We use it in our space program. Our astronauts' helmet visors are coated with gold. The satellites we put up all have gold protection because it reflects the sun's rays, and it apparently has some protection against gamma radiation. It has many properties, and as I say, it's 19 times heavier than water, so that it can be precipitated out by washboarding it.
Is there any actual proof of the Anunnaki coming back to our planet?
No.
No.
I don't know of any proof of that, but I do know that there was a recent, very fascinating Russian documentary film. I don't know if you saw that or not, but it tells the story of the Antarctic expedition led by Admiral Byrd in 1947 to try to destroy what they thought was a secret Nazi underwater base in Antarctica, and this was 4,700 troops, many ships, an aircraft carrier, a couple of submarines and airplanes that went down to the Antarctic and were repelled by UFOs. They were attacked by UFOs. And the Russian documentary quotes, from the KGB files. It was covered up in this country, and Admiral Byrd wasn't allowed to talk about it, but he did say that the weapons that were used against them were impossible to defend against, and so they retreated. The whole thing turned around and they left. And the story of an attack by UFO-type vessels from the Antarctic base, and also the connection between the Nazis and maybe they had contact with the Anunnaki because their weapon systems were so far advanced from the rest of us, everybody wondered where the hell they got that technology from. So it's possible to me, Russell, that the Nazis had connected with the Anunnaki and that there was this underwater base in the Antarctic and that we were attacked by these UFOs to repel us. They didn't want to destroy us. They could have destroyed us if they wanted to, but they just turned us around. And that's been verified. I've checked the records of our side of the story, and it coincides with what the Russians are saying in this documentary film. It's a fascinating story. I can read you one quote. The thing shot vertically out of the water at tremendous velocity. This is one of the guys. It shot down a Chinook that took off a few minutes later in an unknown type of ray from the object, almost instantly crashed into the sea near our vessel. About 10 miles away, one of our boats burst into flame and began to sink. Having personally witnessed this attack by the object that flew out of the sea, all I can say is it was frightening. This is a direct quote from one of our naval personnel. It's in there. I mean, it's a story that apparently has been covered up by our government, but there are bits and pieces of it around, and apparently the KGB had all the information, and they released it in this documentary film. It's amazing. It's just incredible how this information is coming out. I think there's a kind of a concerted effort now by other governments other than our own to try to bring forward the reality, the disclosure, as it were, of alien contact.
There's a film being put out about your last book by Kevin Flint.
Yes, he's my filmographer. It's a documentary that he and I are making together. The first 6 minutes of it is posted on my webpage.
Well, if the Anunnaki were here, are they still here? And if they aren't, where did they go?
Yeah, I think they're still in that base under the Antarctic. And I've been researching who might be in command. You know, the question that Sitchin and I asked him, I said, if they come back, what's going to happen? He says, it depends on who's in command. As you may have or may not know, or your audience may and may not know, there were two factions. There was the Little faction and the Enki faction. And according to the story of the Great Flood, Enki was the leader who saved humanity from the flood. And Enlil really didn't care about us and was willing to let us all be killed. So that was the question that Zecharia and I kicked back and forth. He said, it depends on who's in command when they come back. But I've now found new research, Russell, that one of the leaders, who was the son of Enki, his name was Marduk. And I don't think Marduk was eventually made commander of Earth. He was in control of the Earth. And he was the firstborn son of Enki, and Enki was the firstborn son of Anu, who was the king of the Anunnaki, and there was a squabble about who was going to have the rights to succession. And Marduk always thought that his father should be, but there's another story that I won't go into right now. Anyway, I think Marduk is still here, and I think he was based in the Antarctic when this attack took place that's revealed by the Russian documentary. And the reason I think Marduk was the one that was in command is that he, through all the stories that were translated from the cuneiform tablets, was the arch enemy of Enlil. And there's some speculation and perhaps proof that Enlil was Yahweh, the God of the Hebrews. And if that's true, and this enmity existed between Marduk and Enlil, and he helped the Nazis. The Nazis' main historical event was the Holocaust, where 6 million Hebrews or Jews were killed. And if he aided in that, that would fit the format of his war against Enlil. It's a fascinating story. I'm not saying that's proven by any means, Russell. What I'm saying is I'm speculating that if there was an Anunnaki leader who remained on Earth and was submerged under the Antarctic with this base and had UFO fighters, which were exhibited in this Russian documentary, then he might have been conspiring with the Nazis and helping them with their technology, because they obviously had weapons that were far more advanced than ours, the V-2 rockets and the ones that were direct rocket attacks on London were much more advanced than anything we ever had. And they also have research that they were working on flying saucers. The Nazis had technology developing their own flying saucers. And where did they get that technology from? My guess is that the advanced species like the Anunnaki who had the technology were maybe transferring some of it to this regime.
Do you spend any time whatsoever attempting to debunk this stuff?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. In fact, my first book, Adam the Missing Link, was started to write to try to disprove Sitchin. And when I finished the book, I became a devotee. I became a disciple. I figured out that all the things that I had questioned were proven. I try to prove and find other resources that could corroborate what I'm saying. I don't debunk things as a conspiracy theory. I'm not into that.
There's a great website out there, ancientaliensdebunked.com. And I'll quote Zecharia Sitchin. In the ancient texts of Sumeria, we have descriptions of these being descended from the sky called the Anunnaki. The term Anunnaki means those who from heavens came.
Heaven to earth came.
AncientAliensDebunked.com says, this is entirely wrong. The word Anunnaki means princely seed or princely blood. The idea is that the Anunnaki were direct creations of Anu, who is regarded as the father and king of the gods. Your thoughts on that?
I think there are several sites that have tried to debunk Sitchin because they don't have anything positive on their own to report. I have no quarrel with people who would wish to challenge the theory of Sitchin. All I'm saying is that since he's no longer with us, I've taken up the torch and I'm defending what he said as being very accurate, and that the vast body of people who were in our field, ufologists, agree that Sitchin was on the money, that his translations were so incredible. There were, of the 300,000 cuneiform tablets that have been found, Russell, 2,000 of them have scientific information in them. And those are the ones that he translated and put into book form. And if you were to ever pick up a copy of The Lost Book of Enki by Zecharia Sitchin, you will see direct translations from the cuneiform tablets of the story of the Anunnaki. It's a fascinating story. It goes way back to what was going on in their home planet. And frankly, the question that Sitchin and I often bantered about was who created the Anunnaki? You know, they had a deity, according to the writings in the cuneiform tablets. Their deity was called the creator of all. And if they were, say, 1 million years more advanced than we were, and they still didn't answer the question, you know, they couldn't answer the final question, where the hell did life come from? I'll tell you an interesting story. When I was 19 years old, in 1950, I had a professor at Caltech who was my chemistry professor. His name was Linus Pauling. And I asked the doctor if he believed in God. And he said, Clarfeld, our discipline is to explain everything in the universe back to the beginning of time, the Big Bang. If you were to ask me what there was a millisecond before the Big Bang, we don't know. If you want to believe in God, please do, because we don't have the answer of where the universe came from. Now, I think any advanced civilization, like the Anunnaki, for instance, would have the same question. They don't know the answer to that. And if they have a deity called the creator of all, it's obvious to me that there are still some unanswered questions that you and I can talk about, but I don't think we'll ever get an answer to.
What is Nibiru? And does it have anything to do with the now dead comet Ison?
No, the comets were formed when Nibiru was a planet that was expelled from another star system. It was free-floating in space and was captured by the gravitational field put out by our solar system at the farthest large planet, which was Neptune. It came in clockwise or retrograde into our solar system, and that was maybe 3 or 4 billion years ago. And it hit one of its moons when it came through the center of our solar system, which was between Jupiter and Mars. Its moon whacked a fourth planet, which was called Tiamat, which was a water planet, and it cut it in half. The result went clockwise. The debris would be of the half of the Tiamat that was destroyed by this impact became the asteroid belt and the comets. And they circulate around the sun in a clockwise fashion. Everything else, all the planets are counterclockwise around our sun. But here we have a body of comets that go clockwise, and Nibiru goes clockwise, and it's, according to the translations, has a 3,600-year orbit. Comes back every 3,600 years, and it's been recorded by past civilizations. There are written records of this thing in the sky that caused all kinds of problems when it came in between Jupiter and Mars because of its gravitational forces on Earth. In fact, the Greeks called it Nemesis, described what its problem was. The Romans never recorded it. It's the only civilization that could have recorded it, but they did talk about the Star of Bethlehem, and nobody's ever really analyzed what the Star of Bethlehem was. I think it was the passing of Nibiru, which happened at around birth of Christ, the year 30 BC or 0. So if indeed that's the orbital time frame, we've got about another 1,500 or 1,600 years before it comes back into our inner planet.
Nibiru won't be here in anyone's lifetime.
No, not yours, not mine, unless we become immortal.
Which is possible with this Avatar 2045 project.
Yes, there are certain experiments going on in Berkeley right now where they're dealing with worms. I don't know if you've heard about that. They've genetically engineered a worm species where this doctor who did it, she claims she turned off the Grim Reaper gene on one set of worms, and they live 5 times longer than the other worms. And if you extrapolate that into humans, that means if we could find the Grim Reaper gene and turn it off in our system, we could live to be 500 years. The Bible tells us of humans that live 900 years. And so there has to be some correlation between these stories and what's real and what isn't real, Russell.
The idea that ancient people were too primitive to have accomplished some of these great things, such as the pyramids, is this ancient aliens' view of history racist? And if not racist, disrespectful to the accomplishments and intelligence of our ancestors?
No, I don't think so. I think that the theory of technology transfer can be traced in the history of our species, the Homo sapiens sapiens. And always when an advanced civilization encounters an aboriginal one, there is this technological transfer that takes place. And if the story of the Sumerians having arrived with all the first, which is impossible, I mean, historically it doesn't happen. People don't come out of the caves and start writing music and talk about astronomy and astrology, mathematics and the wheel. This Sumerian civilization, I think, was the first recorded advanced civilization that apparently had 15 or 16 of the first discoveries of advanced civilization on the planet. And they admitted that they didn't do it themselves, that they were given this technology by the Anunnaki. So I tend to agree that the Neolithic tribes and civilizations that we know about that were predecessors to Homo sapiens, we have a species called Homo erectus. And Homo erectus was evolving on this planet as a creature, looked like us, stood up, walked around on 2 legs, had advanced in 1,800,000 years to the tool-making proficiency of wooden spears and stones. Now ask yourself this question. Homo sapiens were discovered, our species, in Southeast Africa, exactly where they said they did it, 200,000 years ago. And that's a very short time frame, 200,000 years, Russell, in the evolutionary scheme of things. And we're walking on the moon in 1969. You can't really explain that through evolution. It wouldn't have happened. We had to have something special going on in our genetic code to enable us to develop tools that were advanced so rapidly in 200,000 years that we were technically able to leave this planet, become semi-space age civilization, and walk on the moon. So were the early Neanderthals and the farmers and hunter-gatherers capable of building the pyramids? No. In my estimation, they didn't have the tools and the knowledge. Now, they might have helped an advanced civilization do it. I'm going to be quoting in my next book, the fourth book, which will be out early next spring, from the cuneiform tablets, how the pyramids were built, who built them, and who built the Sphinx. Now, we've had certain researchers recently who have studied the Sphinx, and they found water erosion. Are you familiar with that story?
Yes.
Okay, and they placed that time frame of the Sphinx back 10,500 years ago. There's also a body of knowledge by Robert Bauval that the Orion Belt is a simulation of the pyramids. The pyramids were a simulation of the Orion Belt, and you turn the clock backwards on the exact formation there, you come to the year 10,500 BC. If both of these scientific research projects are true, there were no Egyptians 10,500 years ago, Russell. That was a desert with nomads and hunter-gatherers roaming around there. There was no civilization. The Egyptian civilization didn't come until 300 years after the Sumerians, and that's only 6,000 years ago. So you tell me, how could that be?
Right. Well, we don't know if it's true.
I'm an engineer, and I'm a tire kicker, Russell. I need to have physical evidence. That's why I'm going to pursue my theory with physical proof. In the next book, I will bring forward physical proof, and also I will start traveling to the various sites where I claim they were gold mining operations, and I will physically attempt to prove that that's true. My whole modus operandi right now, Russell, is to prove that there was this ET civilization, the Anunnaki, here on this planet. It might not have been the only ET visitors to this planet. I mean, we're kind of like a 7-Eleven. Everybody stops in to take a look. But the only ones that left a robust database, 300,000 cuneiform tablets and thousands of cylinder seals that recorded their history and what they did and have lasted. You know, we don't have any technology, Russell, that's going to last more than 100 or 200 years, much less 1,000 years.
No, it's true. If there were a great cataclysm tomorrow or today, there wouldn't be much left of us in a couple thousand years.
That's right. We have no means of preserving our history. Apparently, the Anunnaki did. The cylinder seals and the cuneiform tablets are a record that comes to us from 6,000 years ago, intact. They're to be studied. They're to be analyzed. They're to be learned from what they knew, what they were trying to do, and what they did do.
Why would they be so cryptic? It seems to me that they would be a little more precise and less vague if they were trying to pass on information.
Well, they did. They were detailed how they created Adam. The story in the cuneiform tablets spells out exactly how they did it. They created a bicameral species by taking the egg from the female Homo erectus, scooping out the nucleus, putting their DNA in it, and planting it into one of their birth mothers, an Anunnaki birth mother, and there's a cylinder seal that depicts this creation, produced Adam. They called it Adamu, the first human. And so they gave detailed information. We're doing it today. In other words, women who are infertile receive this same transplantation, and they get children. But when you take a bicameral result, like if Adam was a bicameral species, he was part Homo erectus and he had DNA of the Anunnaki, they couldn't reproduce themselves. No, it's Adam and Eve could not reproduce children. They were infertile. So another experiment was done, and that's explained in great detail in the cuneiform tablets also, of how Adam's rib was somehow manipulated to make Eve fertile. For instance, if you cross a horse and a donkey, you get a mule, right? And a mule can't reproduce itself. It's sterile. So that's what Adam and Eve were, and then they had to produce another procedure, which they described in great detail in the cuneiform tablets, of how they made Eve fertile so that she could reproduce with Adam, Homo sapiens. Now, the first species was Homo sapiens. Later on, there came another species, which you and I are. It's called Homo sapiens sapien. That occurred by one of the Anunnaki lords, his name was Enki, directly impregnating two human females. And that caused a greater transfer of their DNA than the original experiment did. In other words, we originally were created as primitive workers, according to the cuneiform stories, and weren't quite as smart as Homo sapiens sapiens. So, I mean, the story is there. The details are there. The information is there. All it needs to do is get a wider attention and let people make up their own minds. I'm not telling people what they should believe and what they shouldn't believe. I'm saying just examine the facts and make up your own mind.
How has your fascinating view of history affected your personal life? Do people know who you are, where you live? Do little children snicker about crazy old man Clarfeld? Are there whispers in the grocery aisles?
Oh, yeah. I've been called a woo-woo, and I don't care. I mean, people who have lived in this box and not been able to think outside of it are fine. I don't have any questions or quarrels with them. It's rejuvenated my third career, as you probably can guess from the dates that I've given you, kind of a super senior. Yet I'm in the third career of my life, and I'm excited, and I'm exploring, and I'm discovering new things. And I think that I'm hopefully able to contribute somewhat to the dialogue. After all, this is just a huge dialogue between people about what happened. And I think that I'm not a preacher. I don't try to convince people that my story is true. I just say, please examine these facts and make up your own mind, because I think the facts speak for themselves.
Well, you've written several books. You've got a new one coming out in the spring. Where can people pick up your books and learn more about you?
I have a website called www.adamthemissinglink.com. It's the title of the first book. 3Ws.adamthemissinglink.com. There's 2 pages. First page tells a little bit about me, and it also allows them to view the first 6 minutes of that documentary film we talked about. The second page has 3 books on it now, and it explains what each book is and how it can be acquired in many forms, hard copies, ebooks, even on Kindle.
And when's the movie coming out? I have to admit the trailer looks pretty good.
Okay, thank you. Well, we're working hopefully to get Leonard Nimoy to be our narrator. And we're raising money now. I've got 2 contacts that we need to fund the balance of it. And then we have another project where the second book was written in a screenplay format, Russell. It's called Gilgamesh 10, which is the story of the first action hero. And we're actually working with some folks right now, a producer, to make it into a major film. So those are 2 projects, the documentary film and the Gilgamesh trilogy. It'll be kind of like Star Wars, as a 3-movie trilogy, with the first one being the story of Gilgamesh. I have ambitions. I challenge myself with impossible goals, and that's how I keep going. It self-renews me.
One last question. Sergei Baranov asked me this, and he's a columnist for the Intel Hub. Did you learn about the Anunnaki from Sitchin and take it from there, or did you find out about it elsewhere on your own?
That's a good question. No, I didn't. I was pursuing other avenues when I think it was 1996 or 7, I discovered 12th Planet by Zecharia. And once I read that, I called him up on the phone, and we started this 10-year relationship. He had opened the door for me to answer the final question that I couldn't put together on my own. No, I did not discover the Anunnaki on my own. I discovered it through Sitchin.
Marshall Clarfeld, absolutely great having you on the show today. Really enjoyed it.
Well, I hope that you will pursue your own ideas about, you're a very smart young man, and you probably running into the questions that I ran into when I was your age, and you need to find answers, and that's all I'm doing. I'm just trying to satisfy the questions that keep popping up in my mind. What was this? How did it work? Why was it built? What were the reasons, and how did they do it? Those are all the questions that I try to get answers to. It's been a pleasure talking with you, Russell, and good luck to you.
Marshall Clarfeld, welcome back to the program.
Thank you, Russell. Good to be with you again.
Marshall Clarfeld graduated with an engineering degree from Caltech in 1951 after studying under Nobel laureate professors Richard Feynman and Linus Pauling. Fascinated by what he considered advanced scientific knowledge in the Bible story of creation, Clarfeld embarked on a quest to unravel the mysteries surrounding humanity's early history. Marshall has written 4 books: Adam the Missing Link, Gilgamesh 10, The Anunnaki Were Here, and his newest book, The Mysteries of Alien Technology. Marshall has made many appearances on radio, including 11 appearances on Coast to Coast AM. He has also appeared on the History Channel's popular TV series Ancient Aliens. You can learn more about Marshall Clarfeld by visiting adamthemissinglink.com. Marshall, just to get everyone up to speed, for those who may not know, who or what are the Anunnaki?
Okay, according to the vast database that Zecharia Sitchin translated from the Sumerian cuneiform tablets and the cylinder seals and the Bible, the Anunnaki were a space-age civilization who from heaven to earth came. If you recall in the Bible, Genesis 6:4 said that the Nephilim were upon the earth in those days. They were the sons of gods, and they coveted the daughters of man. They had intercourse with them and created the giants of old, the men of renown. Now, the Nephilim has never really been explained. It's mentioned once in the Bible, but in the database that Zecharia translated from the cuneiform tablets and the cylinder seals, this was a space-age civilization that colonized planet Earth over 400,000 years ago. I think it's a well-accepted theory now. There have been many naysayers, Russell, which we will always have those, but I think it's hard not to put all the pieces together and connect the dots. There are physical things on this planet that could not have been constructed by Stone Age civilizations of the time frame when they were built. The pyramids, for example, Stonehenge. There are many, many other structures around the planet that are so sophisticated in design that they bear the mark of an advanced civilization that built them. And I think the proof is overwhelming that this civilization existed. In my books, I've put pictures of the things that were done and tried to explain the technology that was used. They were excellent stone craftsmen. They could take stone and make almost anything out of it. And the fact that they put things together without mortar, they put the stone structures together without mortar, is a classic design work.
Such as the Great Pyramid.
Not only the Great Pyramid, but almost every major structure that's still standing that's 2,000 years old. Roman aqueducts, the Colosseum, the Pantheon, the Parthenon. These structures are all put together without mortar. They're stones perfectly cut and fitted together that are still standing. And you ask yourself, well, wow, how's that possible? Our stuff doesn't last that long. We build and tear down, build and tear down. But we use materials like steel and reinforced concrete. They didn't have those tools. They just had what was available, and the constructions were proof of advanced technology. There's just no denying it. You can't walk away from it, Russell.
You were on my show in November of 2013. Have you learned any new information about the Anunnaki since then?
Oh yeah. That was before I wrote the 4th book. And the 4th book, I discovered that my washboard gold mining theory, which you and I talked about on that show, I didn't have a way how they picked up the gold. I hadn't figured out a system of how the gold was collected when it banged down onto the washboard steps of the step pyramids. I've discovered that there was a famous fable called Jason and the Golden Fleece. There's a statue in Sochi, Russia, of Princess Medea holding up a sheepskin that's filled with gold. And the way that happened was that they would drag sheepskin in placer rivers, river waters that are filled with placer gold, and the particles of gold would collect on the sheepskin. And they dry it out, and then they had their gold. So I put two and two together, and I said they were using sheepskin. And I said, well, if sheepskin was the collection system, they needed millions and millions of sheep. And I noticed that a guy like Michael Tillinger has discovered a bunch of stone circles in Southeast Africa. Well, I expanded the search. I found the same stone circles in Syria, in Peru, and I found out that these are called sheepfolds. In ancient times, when they didn't have a bunch of shepherds, you could build a bunch of circles of stone and you'd graze your sheep. You didn't need to have a shepherd there. So if this system was, the Anunnaki had a system of collecting gold using sheepskin, they needed millions and millions of sheep. They built millions and millions of stone sheepfolds and raised the sheep. And that kind of reinforces how they picked up the gold. Do you understand what I'm saying?
I do, but couldn't they have made a synthetic wool without having to slaughter, or rather shear real sheep?
Well, yeah, sure, but why do that when you have a natural product? In other words, they used what was here. And what was here naturally was stone, and there was sheep, and there was gold. In order to collect the gold, they had to pass the placer water over a terrace structure like a washboard. And when the gold banged out on the surface, it had to be collected. And the collection system I'm declaring were sheepskin.
What was the great importance of gold to the Anunnaki?
Well, they said in their stories that they told us on the cuneiform tablets that they needed gold to seal an ozone leak in their atmosphere. Their planet has a 3,600-year orbit around our sun, and they punched a hole in their atmosphere, and they needed to close it up. And the only thing that they found that worked were very fine particles of gold that they could flake up there and have it reflect the sun out and heal the ozone leak. That's the story they gave us. Whether that's the true reason, we don't know, but everybody agrees that they came to this planet because we had the gold and they didn't.
But how does anyone know that these ancient Sumerian texts weren't simply works of fiction?
Nobody knows that for sure, Russell, and it could be that the victors always write this history the way they want it to sound. And these are the only guys around that were smart enough that they taught us how to write and read. I would say they were telling stories that they wanted us to believe, and that's what they wanted us to believe. Now, here's an interesting thing I've been working on recently, Russell. Is there really a need for us to be a civilized people? For instance, why aren't we all just Stone Age? We don't need high-rise buildings. We don't need all the fancy words and art and literature and music. And the Sumerians are an interesting civilization. They were the first complete civilization that appears about 6,000 years ago, and they wrote that everything they had was given to them by the Anunnaki. In other words, if you were an Aboriginal and you just were living hand to mouth like Stone Age creatures, why would you want to build a civilization? There's really no reason for you to do that unless somebody gave you that form. And I think It appears that the Anunnaki gave to the Sumerians the wheel, written language, philosophy, mathematics, music, art, religion, all the basis high-rise buildings. There's no really need for a high-rise building. So you have to ask yourself the question, if like several of the tribes around the world today that we've discovered that have been untouched are still Stone Age people. They've never evolved out of the Stone Age until we introduced to them the features that would give them that civilization. And if you ask yourself, well, why are we here and how did we get here? It had to be with help. There's no way without some outside introduction of technology that we would have progressed beyond Stone Age. I believe that the testimony of the fact that we're here and this is what we're doing can be attributed to the fact that it was given to us by an advanced civilization like the Anunnaki. Just as we do when we discover Aboriginal tribes that have never had outside influences on them. I know that the original bicameral experiment that produced Homo sapiens, in other words, if you look at the tree of human life, the species on this planet just before Homo sapiens was called Homo erectus. Homo erectus had evolved for 1,800,000 years, was a creature that couldn't speak, and it had a third our brain size, and the only tools that they had developed were wooden spears and stones. Now, 200,000 years ago in Southeast Africa, a new species appears called Homo sapiens. And there are no skeletal remains between Homo erectus and Homo sapiens that prove that we evolved from Homo erectus. So you got to ask yourself the question, where did Homo sapiens come from? And they give us the answer. In other words, in their translations and in the writings in the cuneiform tablets, they tell exactly the method that they used. And what they said they did was they took the egg of the Homo erectus female, they scooped out the nucleus, and they put their DNA in there, and they planted that egg in one of their birth mothers, and that's how they produced Adam.
Can you believe in the writings of the Bible and Zecharia Sitchin without contradiction?
Yes. Yes, he was a biblical scholar, and he was able to show the correlation between the translation and the cuneiform text. That's what's so brilliant about that guy. He was, I studied under him for 10 years, and we would have many discussions, and his brilliance astounded me to how he could pick dates and times in the Bible and correlate them to events that were written in the cuneiform tablets by the Anunnaki and tie it all together. And it's most of the stories that are in the Bible, like the flood story, Noah, come from the cuneiform stories first. They predate the Bible by 1,000 years. And if you read my second book called Gilgamesh 10, it tells what was supposedly the true story of what happened at the flood. And here's another question, Russell, you got to ask yourself. There have been extinction moments in history that have wiped out the dinosaurs, for instance, 66 million years ago. And what came after? Well, there was an extinction of all surface life 11,500 years ago when this flood occurred. If there were any surviving Homo sapiens, how could they survive without help? Where would they get their food? Where would they get their animals? Where would they get their basis to survive? They had to have outside help. So, if what they say happened, we all share the same DNA. In other words, we're all products, we're kind of a bicameral species. We're part Homo erectus and part Anunnaki. So that the species Homo sapiens sapien is very special, and it came out of nowhere, and there's no evolutionary track that you can show how we became what we are from some previous ancestor here on the planet Earth. There is no connection. There's a missing link. That's why I call my first book Adam the Missing Link. Because Adam was the first created Homo sapien. Adam and Eve were sterile because they were created that way. They couldn't reproduce. It's like crossing a donkey with a horse. You get a mule, and mules cannot reproduce themselves. So Adam and Eve were sterile, and there had to be some kind of an experiment done to make Eve fertile so that we could reproduce ourselves. And that's where the story of Adam's rib, I think, comes in the Bible. But anyway, it all fits together for me. I have no doubts in my mind today, Russell, that what Sitchin translated makes sense, and it couldn't have happened any other way, because I can't think of another set of circumstances that would have produced an intelligent species like you and I from where we were. This is a very small, short period of time. Can you imagine a species 200,000 years old, which is in the evolutionary scale a speck of nothing, and we're walking on the moon? Where did we generate all those tools? How did we generate all those tools necessary to take ourselves from Stone Age to Space Age in less than 200,000 years? That just doesn't happen. There had to be some outside intervention to make that possible.
In our last interview, you said you believe the Anunnaki are still here somewhere in Antarctica. Do you believe in the hollow earth theory, which poses there are entry points at either poles which lead into the inner earth?
I've found no proof of that, Russell, but I do believe it's possible that there are pockets of under the Antarctic ice shelf. Could be a Shangri-La, like the Nazis said they'd found a Shangri-La down there. And I do believe that the influence on the planet is still being affected by the Anunnaki. I believe that the advanced technology that the Germans got in World War II came from an advanced species.
Actually, that leads to an audience question here. If the Anunnaki were helping the Nazis, why didn't Hitler win? Good question.
Good question, yeah. The timing was off. We got the bomb.
Wouldn't the Anunnaki, I mean, if they're able to travel through time and space or whatnot, wouldn't they not have that kind of technology?
Yeah, but they love to play games with us. They love to see us fight each other. And they were still in control. They still had the master technology that we still don't have. If they're still here, or if they're going to come back shortly, we will see an advanced technology that we've never seen before.
Another member of the audience here asks, why all this secrecy? Admiral Byrd met with some out-of-this-world resistance back in 1947. Don't we have a right to know the truth?
I've tried to uncover his records, his logs, and his books of what happened down there in Antarctica in February of 1947 when he turned around and came home with his tail between his legs with a bunch of casualties. And the government has covered it up. There's a super need on the part of the government not to let us know what happened. I can't explain it, but it's there.
Another audience question, are the Anunnaki and the Pleiadians the same?
I don't think so. I think the question is, are there other advanced societies or species, civilizations other than the Anunnaki? I say, yeah. There is no proof that I have that the Pleiadians exist. I have proof that the Anunnaki exist. There are maybe dozens of other space-age civilizations, but the only ones that I have absolute proof of are the Anunnaki. The information on the Pleiadians all comes from channeling, and I don't really trust channeling.
But you do see the universe as sort of a Star Trek model where there are different civilizations.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I don't think that we're alone, and I don't think that it's a good question people ask me often, Russell, is where did the Anunnaki come from? Who created them? And they had a deity. Their deity is called the creator of all. And if they're a civilization, say, is 1 million years more advanced than we are, and they came across the same questions, who created the universe and where did the universe come from, and they don't know the answer. Did I ever tell you that I asked Linus Pauling if he believed in God, and he gave me? He said, Clarfeld, our discipline is to explain everything that's going on in the universe back to the beginning, the Big Bang. If you were to ask me what there was a millisecond before the Big Bang, we don't know. If you want to believe in a God, please do, because we don't know how the universe was created. So the Anunnaki must have run into that same question, and they have a deity that they call the deity, the creator of all.
Well, there are limits to what science is prepared to answer. How do you take the word pseudoscience? How do you feel about that word in relationship to the Anunnaki? Is that an insult?
Yeah. I think there's overwhelming evidence. I've written 4 books. Other people have written hundreds of books. And I think each one proves that there is this particular extraterrestrial species called the Anunnaki is referred to by all those authors. The evidence is overwhelming.
You said you have proof of the Anunnaki. Do you have any physical proof, anything other than anecdotal?
Well, there's cylinder seals, yeah. The cylinder seals are a magnificent, printing press device made out of stone, exquisitely carved in the negative, and it's hard as steel. And when you roll it on wet clay, you get a positive image, and they have self-portraits of what they look like. They showed us what they look like. And people ask me, do we look like them or they look like us? I say, no, we look like them. They are our parents.
So they don't look like reptilians?
No.
Who controls the world or the elite of the world? Is it the Anunnaki?
I believe so. They've always had a power structure. The first thing they use when you have a small group of advanced people who are trying to control a mass of people that are not as smart as they are, you use kingship first, then you use religion. These are 2 controlling mechanisms, and we have it in spades. I think we are still, the majority of the world are subservient.
Another question from the audience. There's so many here today. Ask Marshall about the Anunnaki eating monoatomic gold powder so they could live for thousands of years. I have read that they made the powder into cakes and ate it for super long lifespans.
It's very possible. I asked that question to Sitchin. I said, they were here for 200,000 years before they created us to help them get the gold. What were they doing with all that gold? They didn't need that much gold to seal the atmosphere on their planet. They must have been maybe ingesting it by monatomic gold. He said, Clarfeld, the record speaks for itself. He would not go, Russell, beyond what the translations that he had written said. He never speculated. I'm a guy who goes outside the box. I also asked him if the story of the mutiny in the mines was a spin to give them cover for creating us. That's the way my mind works. He said no. He said there's no record of that.
Did you and Sitchin ever disagree?
No, he was my teacher. I would come up with these wild ideas, and he'd put me back in my place.
What do you think he would make of the books that you've written now?
I'd love to have him, to share with him what I've discovered, because I think he would smile and say, "Good job."
Is global warming, and this idea was touched upon in the movie Signs, perhaps a result of Anunnaki terraforming?
I doubt it.
Well, did they not ruin the atmosphere of their own planet?
Yeah, well, we are too. Well, we're doing that to ourselves. It's not that they. There's a story in Gilgamesh 10, very significant, I think, philosophical but perhaps true statement that when Enlil, who discovered Noah had survived, that there were survivors, and he accused his brother Enki of breaking his oath. He said, "No, brother, it wasn't me. It was the Creator of all who said that our destiny was to come to planet Earth to create humans, and the humans' destiny was to inherit the planet, take care of it. We're not doing a very good job." They believed in destiny. They were interesting personalities when it came to the future and the past. In fact, Sitchin always said that the past is the future and the future is the past, and that it all goes in cycles, tends to repeat itself. They would not purposely interfere with destiny. Destiny was something that was going to happen. It was going to happen. I'll give you an example. The destiny of the planet Earth is to be consumed by the sun. When the sun goes supernova, it's going to burn up the Earth. Well, there's no way you can change that. That's destiny. So if you understand that, you don't mess around with it. You find other ways.
I was always aware of that fact, by the way. I learned about that when I was a young kid, and it always bugged me. And I thought, well, we have to find a way to get out of this solar system before that happens, right?
Well, that's it. See, our destiny, I think, it's just me, is to become a super space age species and find Earth too, so that we can continue on.
Absolutely. Become a Type 1 or a Type 2 civilization, as Michio Kaku would put it. Here's an interesting question by an audience member. Does the destruction of Sumerian antiquity by ISIS have any correlation with the increased public awareness of the Anunnaki?
I don't think so. I think that just a group of, I really think that there's evil in, every species has evil. The Anunnaki had evil in their species. They weren't all good. Don't let anybody tell you that they were all good. They weren't. Enki's firstborn son, Marduk, was a bad seed. He's caused more trouble on our planet than you can possibly imagine. And his son, Nabu, is also evil. So you've got to deal with this.
Someone just asked here, is Lucifer the same entity as the Anunnaki's Enki?
No, Enki was not Lucifer. I think Marduk would be closer to Lucifer. Enki's son, Enki's firstborn son, Marduk, was a bad seed. Enki saved us once at the flood. It wasn't for him and the instructions he got from the Creator of all how to do it, which is the story of Noah and the Ark. This is explained in Gilgamesh 10. People want to read that. It makes sense that he might be interested in saving us again. He's the good guy.
Your newest book is The Mysteries of Alien Technology. Is there any common technology that we're using now that you would attribute to it being alien technology?
Yes, sure. You realize that the Colosseum was built on a lake bed? Noah had a lake. Nero had a lake. And when he went, they drained the lake and they built the Colosseum on there. But you can't build a Colosseum on a mushy lake bed, so they put a floating foundation under it. They put a foundation below the Colosseum, which was a donut-shaped foundation that went 42 feet down. It was 110 feet wide, donut shaped, and it kept the Colosseum afloat during earthquakes and bad situations. And we learned from that how to build buildings in earthquake areas with floating foundations. So it's one of my discoveries in the fourth book, and I show it, was that not only did they have a floating foundation under the Colosseum, but they also had stones that were clamped together with metal clamps. The vertical columns of the archways and so forth had over 300 tons of metal clamps holding it and reinforcing it. So 2,000 years ago, somebody knew how to build a structure that was earthquake survivable for 2,000 years. It's amazing. I mean, I show pictures of how it was done and describe the technology. The architect who figured that out was way advanced. We just learned about floating foundations 80, 90 years ago.
I have another question here. It's an attack on Zecharia Sitchin. Arizona Wilder MK Ultra victim alleges Sitchin was present at satanic ritual abuse ceremonies. He is a pro-Israeli disinfo agent. Sitchin's degree was first and foremost to his oath of the Knights of Malta, of which there is still a picture on the internet. Any comment to this?
Yeah, that's a bunch of garbage. There are Sitchin haters, Sitchin debunkers, who will try anything to destroy the reputation of a great man. I think he deserves a Nobel Prize for what he did, Russell. He opened our eyes to where we came from. Nobody had done that before. And of course there's going to be people attacking him for that reason. But no, that's a bunch of garbage.
Another one here is that he was connected to the Rothschilds. He attended the London School of Economics right along with George Soros. Lord Rothschild is an instructor at the London School of Economics.
That's just a bunch of associations that aren't true and that are designed to cast dispersions on his work. See, the reason why some people can't accept Sitchin's brilliance is because he came out of nowhere. It's kind of like Einstein. You know, Einstein was a clerk in the patent office when he wrote his papers, on relativity, and nobody knew who the hell he was. And all of a sudden, onto the scene comes this brilliant idea from a guy who's a clerk in a Swiss patent office. Well, I believe that brilliance is often given to certain individuals through intelligent hard work, and he was a hard worker. He was a biblical scholar. He could read the original Hebrew, and he could correlate the stories in the Bible with the stories in the cuneiform tablets, and he could decipher the cosmology that the Anunnaki left us about how our solar system was formed. And in his first book, it's a brilliant book called The 12th Planet. He goes into great detail to explain our solar system and how it took shape. And more is being proven today that he's correct. That there was a collision. People at first said there was no collision with Earth. And, all the things that he said are coming to pass are true.
Have you heard of Dr. Mike Hauser?
Yeah, sure. He's the worst of them.
I'll read an excerpt as an open letter to Sitchin. Of course, Sitchin's passed away now. Very simply, the ancient Mesopotamians compiled their own dictionaries. We have them, and they have been published since the mid-20th century. The words Mr. Sitchin tells us refer to rocket ships have no such meanings according to the ancient Mesopotamians themselves. Likewise, when Mr. Sitchin tells readers things like the Sumerians believed there were 12 planets, the Anunnaki were space travelers, Nibiru was the supposed 12th planet, etc., he is simply fabricating data. It isn't a question of how he translates texts. The issue is that these ideas don't exist in any cuneiform text at all.
That's not true. I mean, he can say whatever he wants to say, but there are other scholars, other translators who've come to the same conclusion that Sitchin did. So Dr. Heiser can go, keep saying what he's saying, but it's just not true. And I will defend Sitchin with every breath I have. He's absolutely discovered something worth a Nobel Prize. And all my life I've been looking for the answers that he provided me with. Are we alone in the universe? Where did we come from? And why are we here?
Some of the audience seem to wonder if there's going to be an invasion by the Anunnaki.
No, there won't be an invasion by the Anunnaki. People seem to tend to believe that the only time the Anunnaki can return to this area is when Nibiru comes back, and that's not true. They existed here for hundreds of thousands of years living on their mothership. And when they left the area, they took the mothership with them, and they could be hanging out, for instance, around Mercury, which is nearby, and come back anytime they want. And my belief, Russell, is they saved us once. Enki saved us once, and if we are their sort of children, and he believes that we're worth saving, then we get in big trouble. He's going to come back and help again. And they're capable of doing that. There's been stories of silos that have been deactivated by UFOs.
Here's another one. The Anu are not your friends. In fact, this reality is a prison they created for us. This reality is in fact a holographic projection currently being played out in our minds. The Anu keep our real bodies in a sort of sleep state and our consciousness entrapped in this holographic reality in a state of heightened emotion, generally by some sort of fear, as it creates the highest emotional content they can harvest.
Is that a question?
I don't know. It's sort of a comment, I guess. Perhaps we're living in some sort of matrix reality. This all just speaks to the misconceptions that people have, I think.
Are people searching for answers. And I found my core. I'm happy with the story that I have. I'm not a preacher, Russell. I'm a reporter. I'm reporting what I found. I'm reporting what Sitchin found. And Sitchin always said he was a reporter. He was just reporting what he found in the translations. I put out some YouTubes. If folks want to go to my YouTube page, they can just go to YouTube and type my name in, and you'll see several short films that I made. One of them was on Atlantis, and one of them was on landing platform, and various parts of the story I've encapsulated in short YouTube forms, which, like, what do the Nazca lines represent? I call them a time capsule. I think the Anunnaki left us a time capsule there. So there's information on the internet on my ideas and stuff that I didn't publish in my books, but I produced on my YouTube page. Would help people. I think if they go to my website, by the way, my books are available at adamthemissinglink.com for the best value around. Amazon has them at about twice the price. And you can get them on Kindle, and they're available on ebooks. But that's all on my second page of my website, and it explains what they are. And I think people will enjoy gathering them together and getting the information. By the way, I'm going to be appearing in person May the 29th at Joshua Tree, California. There's a conference called Contact in the Desert. And I will be giving a lecture, a workshop, and a panel with George Norrie. And Giorgio and Eric von Daniken will be on that panel. So we're going to have a lot of fun up there. It's a 3-day session. You can go on the internet, just type in "contact in the desert," and it'll come up and show you how to get there. So we invite everybody to come join us. It's lots of fun.
The audience seems to be pretty interested in the gold itself and why they needed to mine gold here on Earth. Many are saying, they could have created their own gold.
No, you can't create gold. That's the alchemy problem. Everybody from the beginning of time has tried to turn things into gold. You don't. The gold is there. You have to collect it. And by the way, I'm going to be launching a product called the Golden Fleece Kit, where you can have this device that you can drag in the water. If you find a placer stream at the spring runoff, you put your sheepskin in this sled, drag it in the water, and you'll collect your own gold.
Have you tried this already? Has it worked?
Yeah, sure.
And you'll be selling these on your website?
Yes, shortly. I'm going to launch it on eBay first, and then I'll put it on my website, and I'll have them available up at Joshua Tree.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun panning for gold or
yeah, well, it's $1,200 an ounce, so.
Marshall Klarfeld, once again, the website is adamthemissinglink.com. You can check out his books there. They're at a reduced price. Marshall, thank you so much for being on the program today.
You're quite welcome, Russell. Thank you for the interview.
On tonight's program, I interview Marshall Klarfeld. Marshall Klarfeld graduated with an engineering degree from Caltech in 1951 after studying under such luminaries as Nobel laureate professors Richard Feynman and Linus Pauling. Fascinated by what he considered advanced scientific knowledge in the Bible story of creation, Klarfeld embarked on a quest to unravel the mysteries surrounding humanity's early history. He's the author of Adam, the Missing Link, Gilgamesh 10, The Anunnaki Were Here, and his newest book, Mysteries of Alien Technology. To learn more about Marshall Klarfeld, visit adamthemissinglink.com. Marshall Klarfeld, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Russell. Glad to be with you.
Well, I got to ask it. How old are you?
May the 10th of this year, I'll be 88 years old.
Third oldest guest on the program. The oldest is Jacques Fresco, been on the show twice. He's still around. He's 101 years old. Wayne Green, he's passed on now, 91 years old. And Marshall Klarfeld, 87, going on 88. Still writing books and still coming up with new theories regarding the Anunnaki. Remember, Marshall Klarfeld was a student and friend of Zecharia Sitchin. So with that said, you've decided to come out with a whole new theory regarding the true God of the Hebrews.
Yes. I think that in the research that Zecharia Sitchin did, and I had a 10-year relationship with him, and we discussed many things on the phone and through correspondence, the subject came up of who was the God of the Hebrews, and I had put forward the suggestion that I thought it was Enlil, who was the commander of the Anunnaki, and Sitchin agreed. He said he thought that was right on. Now, to prove that is another matter, but if you make that assumption, it opens up a whole Pandora's box of the history of the Hebrews.
Did Sitchin ever write about this, or did this only come up in private conversations?
We had it in private conversations. He may have mentioned it in some of his notes. He wrote a lot of stuff outside of the books that were published on his website. I've not researched that recently to see if it's there, but I remember distinctly that it appeared to us that this angry Hebrew god had a lot of the same characteristics as Enlil, who was the commander of the Anunnaki. And if you
make that assumption, and you go trace the history of the animosity between Enki, who was a half-brother of the commander, and particularly Enki's son Marduk. Marduk was a very ambitious bad seed of Enki who wanted to be commander, and the only way he could do that was to undo Enlil. And there's much in Sitchin's writings about this animosity and how it manifested itself. And I've done some research recently which leads me to believe that the thing that has been the longest hatred in the history of humans against each other is this anti-Semitism. And I've traced it to Babylon, when Marduk became supreme. If you recall in the history that Sitchin revealed to us, there was an atomic war between the gods, and Marduk's side was defeated by the Enlilite sons, and it caused, it was in the Sinai desert, and it caused what they called the evil wind. And the evil wind was a dust cloud of atomic particles that drifted from the Sinai desert to the east and eventually reached Sumer and wiped it out. It was actually one of the reasons that the Sumerian civilization disappears so quickly. This atomic fallout did it in. And at that point, since it missed Babylon, this is kind of interesting. The two brothers, Enki and Enlil, as revealed to us in the Lost Book of Enki by Sitchin, decided that it was time that Marduk received supremacy of the earth, and he was given that in Babylon because apparently the evil wind bypassed him, and he got this supremacy. And that was around the year 2024 BC, according to Sitchin. So if you trace back the history of what went on in Babylon from that point forward, one of the kings that Marduk appointed was a guy named Hammurabi. It was around 1754 BC, and he produced a code of rules, over 282 laws of what people should obey and what the penalties would be for each of these crimes, or misdemeanors, or whatever they were. It was quite extensive, and I've read it out, and I went to the Quran, and I found almost identical penalties in the Quran for the similar malfeasances. And I said to myself, well, gee, how did that tie together? And it dawned on me that it was possible that if, this is really speculation on my part, Russell, I want you and your audience to understand that I'm just letting my mind go in the direction of, if Enlil was the god of the Hebrews, could Marduk have been the god of the Islamics? In other words, the Quran, which appeared in around 600, was a book of laws that came from somewhere and were given to their prophet Muhammad, as was the rules and the history of the Hebrews was given by their God in the form of the Torah. In other words, the whole history of Judaism is encased in the book given to Moses, the 5 books of the Torah given to Moses by their God. Now, do you see the connection? Okay. Now, I'm not saying that this is what really happened, but to me, it's a curious situation that from that time forward, there's been this animosity by the Islamic religion against Judaism, And if Marduk felt that his mortal enemy was Enlil, and Enlil's people were the Jews, then you don't attack a god directly, you attack his people.
How long have these Anunnaki wars been going on for?
Well, that's hard to trace. I've been trying to find out exactly when it really got into full bloom, but it's going on for a long time. It's the longest hatred war that there is on the planet, and it's caused much of our problems that we have today. Look at what's going on in the state of Iran. I mean, they are absolutely dedicated to the destruction of Israel and Judaism. It's their credo, and that is being fostered by, I believe, this Anunnaki influence through Marduk. And I can trace another example of the war against Jews. If you go back to the Nuremberg trials, where Admiral Donitz was bragging about this Shangri-La he had with his submarines found in the Antarctic. Have we discussed that?
We talked about Admiral Byrd in the Antarctic.
Okay. Now, if the force that was attacking Admiral Byrd was an Anunnaki rather than a Nazi force, and if the Nazis had connections with the Anunnaki in the Antarctic, if it was Marduk, perhaps the technology that they were getting to fight their war, the advancement that they had beyond what we knew about, the rockets and jet planes and all manner of things, maybe was transferred by Marduk to them to help in achieving the Holocaust. And that's a stretch, I know. It's make people wonder about that, but to me, I just feel that there is a connection there, and I'd like other people to look into it and see if we can develop something on it.
So what would be the connection to Nazis? Or is there one?
Well, okay, Hitler, Admiral Donitz, was his chief naval operator, claimed he had this connection in Shangri-La, which was an Antarctic sub-base in which he said there was advanced technology. And the story of Operation High Jump, Admiral Byrd's expedition to the Antarctic, said they were attacked by flying saucers. And that technology is attributed to the UFO field and the Anunnakis. And if that technology was what turned Admiral Byrd around, and if the Nazis were connected down there, they were getting help, technical transfer of technology in their war against the Jews. I know that's a big leap, Russell, but it's something that just keeps rolling around in my head, and I had to bring it out, and I thought we could discuss it and then maybe tear it apart and maybe destroy it. You know, I'm open to criticism on it, because I feel that if Enlil was indeed the God Yahweh, the God of the Hebrews, it's very possible that Marduk was the God of Muhammad.
Now, of course, what you're saying is incredibly sacrilegious, right?
Absolutely. It's not meant to be. It's just I have a curious mind. In fact, the last year I've written a book called The Adventures of a Curious Mind. It's kind of my memo about my life, and I find that the thing that goes on is questions and answers. It seems to keep the curious mind I have always is asking me, why is this and how does it work? What's going on here? And these are the questions that I've been dealing with. You asked me, what's happened in the last year, and my research has been focused around those two items.
And yet you didn't have to do anything. You could have just sat on the research you'd already done.
Yeah. No, I don't think this has any connection with my 4 books that I wrote. In other words, in the background of the 4 books, I was constantly in conversations with Zecharia about this and about that, and the subject came up a couple of times about who was the God of the Hebrews, and when we came to realize that we had both come to this similar conclusion, it opened a new Pandora's box for me. You know, they wrote the I think, excuse me, it's my opinion that the Anunnaki wrote Gilgamesh, the story of the Epic of Gilgamesh. And its reason was to give us the story of the flood and the background history on it. And if that was the purpose of that, and also they wrote Enuma Elish, there are many things that we get from the cuneiform tablets that deal with the history of our planet, our solar system, and also our people. And so the history of the religions is worth investigating. Where did the religion come from? Where did all the stories come from? Was there a guy called Moses? Did the Hebrews really exodus from Egypt under the story that we have in the Bible? You examine the Torah, for instance, Russell. It's the 5 books of Moses, and the story is that he spent 40 days and 40 nights on a mountaintop, and he got this story from God, Hebrew God. Well, if that Hebrew God was Enlil, he could have given them this story to found the religion that he wanted people to follow him only. He formed my chosen people.
Do the Anunnaki themselves have a religion?
Yes, they did. That's a very good question, Russell. And they had a deity, and the deity they called the creator of all. And I think the reason for that is I told you once about my inquiry with Linus Pauling about if he believes in God. Did we talk about that?
Yes, but we can do it again.
What I'm saying is that every advanced civilization eventually faces up to the question, is there a God and where did the universe come from? And there really doesn't even today seem to be an answer to that. So when I asked Linus Pauling, he's my chemistry professor at Caltech, I said, Dr. Pauling, do you believe in God? He said, Klarfeld, I believe our discipline is to explain everything that's gone on in the universe back to the beginning, the Big Bang. If you were to ask me what there was a millisecond before the Big Bang, we can't tell you. We don't know. If you want to believe in a God as the creator, please do, because we don't have that answer. So I don't think the Anunnaki had that answer either, even as advanced the civilization as they appear to have been. And that therefore, they had a deity called the creator of all, which explained to them where everything came from, where they came from, who created them.
Were they made in the image of their creator?
That's a good question, Russell. I don't think anybody knows the answer to that. It's very possible. That's a good question.
Well, where did this conclusion come from that the Anunnaki are reptilian?
I don't believe that. I mean, there are people who bring forward that theory, and I think it maybe came from some of the images that were carved in stone on different parts of the Sumerian architecture that showed reptilian dogs and showed other bird heads, things like that. But I think those were symbolic. I don't think those represented what the Anunnaki really were. I think the images we have of these very strong, powerful, physical specimens holding different objects in their hands and so forth were really what the Anunnaki look like. I don't believe that they were reptilian at all.
They were human.
We're like them. You know, we were created in their image, and people ask me, do they look like us? I said, no, we look like them.
Let me ask you something, Marshall. How long have you been researching the Anunnaki? And Zecharia Sitchin?
20 some odd years.
And in that time, have you believed something and then through some new information or research of your own or epiphany found that you've come to a new conclusion?
Well, to be honest with you, Russell, all of my life I've wondered where we came from and was there a God? When I found Sitchin, I read the 12th Planet and I said, gee, this is a lot of stuff that would really answer what I've been looking for. Why don't I disprove it? So I started writing my first book called Adam the Missing Link in an attempt to disprove Sitchin and ended up proving him. I mean, that's what happened. I found the core of what I believe he revealed to us. I don't think that story has exceptions to it. It may have, but I have not veered off of that path since I wrote the first book. And the more I researched, the more it reinforced what I believe was truly possible. And I'm kind of a tire kicker. As an engineer, I like to take things apart and look at them from all different angles. And some of the stuff I do is outside the box. And Sitchin never went outside the box. He stayed within the confines of his discipline, his research. And I challenged him several times with the ideas that did come to me. Like I said, the story that you've revealed is that Anunnaki were here for some 200,000 years before humans appeared, before we were created. And they were mining gold all that time. And I said, the initial purpose that was stated was to close the ozone leak in their atmosphere. And he said, yeah. And I said, well, that took not a lot of gold. What did they do with the rest of it? Were they ingesting it? He said, what? I said, there are people out there today, Zecharia, that say that if you ingest monatomic gold, wonderful things happen to you. He said, no. He says, I won't buy that. So here was Klarfeld, challenging the professor on a crazy idea he had that was outside the box. Now, the other thing I challenged him on was, since the victors always write the story the way they want it to be told, were some of the stories that you're translating spin? Were they trying to spin us? And he says, well, what do you mean by that? And I said, for instance, the mutiny story of the gold mines, so the fact that the reason that was given for the creation of primitive workers was that there was a mutiny in their gold mine. He said, yeah, that's what it says. And I said, well, they wrote that. Do you think that that's the truth, or were they just making up a story to cover that they wanted slaves? No. So we went on back and forth like that, Russell, and I was the petulant student who went beyond the box.
What motivates the Anunnaki?
That's a good question, Russell. And I think that the story of the flood might give us some insight into the answer to that. As the story goes, Enlil, the commander, wanted the flood to exterminate humanity. He was fed up with us. He said we were too noisy, we were diluting his bloodline, and this was an opportunity to start over again, just let him on. But Enki, who was more involved in the process of creating us, found a way through messages he got from his creator of all of how to save us and not break his oath to his commander. Well, that's an interesting story. It was told to us in the Epic of Gilgamesh, tablet number 11, and it gave an insight into what was not in the biblical story of Noah. So that story got cleaned up when it hit the Bible. So here we see one of the leaders wanting us to be destroyed
and the other one sort of saving us. So the motivation could be that we are their offspring. We are, in retrospect, their prodigy. And if they saved us once, they might be interested in saving us again if we're about to destroy ourselves. That's a very positive thought.
We have a question here from the audience. How did the Anunnaki know that the Earth had gold?
Well, they're very advanced, and they had an atomic table just like we do. They knew what all the elements were, and somehow they did a survey of all the planets in our solar system, and discovered that uniquely Earth was blessed with gold. That's as far as I can determine.
Well, something I'm curious about, did the Anunnaki energize themselves from the suffering of others?
There are things that we have to speculate on. We cannot give answers to, Russell, because it's not able to, figure things out. This thing I did with the washboard, gold mining, just happened to fit together. I took the pieces of it and I said, well, okay, the flood buried their deep shaft mines in Southeast Africa, and they couldn't go digging around in there, didn't want to or whatever, and the water exposed other sources of gold, and they saw that there were rivers around the planet, like the Nile River. Every spring flood is filled with placer gold from the Nubian mine fields. It's like the Mekong River floods, and every 6 months it was filled with gold, placer gold. And there's a river in Peru called the Urubamba, goes around Machu Picchu, filled with placer gold during the spring runoff. Nature is doing the work for them. All they had to do is figure out how to separate the gold out of the water. And since gold is 19 times heavier than water, if you bounce it like on a washboard, it'll precipitate out. So what I see from many, many of these iconic structures, they're washboards. They're step pyramids, a washboard, the internal upside-down cobalt ceiling of the Great Pyramids, a washboard. Machu Picchu is just a series of washboards. So I put two and two together, and I said, okay, all I do is get the water up there and bang it out. But then I thought, how do you collect the gold? I mean, it's good to bang it out, but it's just tedious to try to pick it up. And I discovered the story of Jason and the golden fleece, that you can put a sheepskin in placer water and it'll fill up with gold. Bingo! I put them all together, and that's what I've come up with, and I think it's a valid assumption that somebody, I hope one day, will prove me to be correct on that discovery.
Did you ever share that theory with Zecharia Sitchin?
No. He had passed on by the time I came to it.
Would he have disagreed?
No, I think he would have agreed with me, because I think in some of his writings he saw these rivers coming through places like there's a bunch of step pyramids that have underground river running through it, and they were able to siphon the water in the tunnels and create pressures, and it was one of the first places that I examined. Then I went over to Angkor Wat. I discovered that Angkor Wat was part of a multiple complex of step pyramids that were in a very high placer water area. And I put it all together. I said, that's what was going on. These beautiful stone monuments were put together in places where there were river water which had placer gold in it.
Are the Anunnaki coming back, or did they ever leave?
Good question, Russell. Hard to answer. I would say that it's possible that they haven't left, or that Marduk hasn't left, because
I believe the mothership phased off with the majority of the Anunnaki with it, but Marduk was kind of hung out, and it's been reported in several instances, whether you believe them or not, to still be hanging out here causing mischief. But the mothership doesn't necessarily have to be too far away. It's possible that it's orbiting today around one of the nearby planets, like maybe Mercury. And if they decide they want to come back, it's not that difficult for them to do that. People sometimes think they have to wait until the home planet Nibiru comes back through our solar system for them to reappear. But that's I don't think the answer. I think the answer is that they're maybe observing us from afar. We have all of these UFO observations of strange things happening, UFOs flying over our missile bases and deactivating them. Things like that would lead me to believe that the presence has not totally gone away.
If the Anunnaki return, will there be a war for the possession of this planet?
Well, I asked Sitchin that question, Russell, and he said it depends on who's in charge. You see, there's still those two factions. If Enki and his dominance is the one who comes back, I think they'll be benevolent and not aggressive at all. If some of the Enlil sons are in charge, it might be a different story. But since it hasn't happened that way, I tend to believe that they bear us no harm.
And we would find a way to coexist with the Anunnaki.
Oh yeah, we did before. See, that's the beautiful part about the Epic of Gilgamesh, is it is a story of when we existed side by side with them. It's Uruk, 4,600 years ago. Ishtar's there, Enlil's there, Enki's there. Gilgamesh is the misfit king who's rumbling around causing problems, and then the whole story is of the coexistence. We were subservient to them. They were our lords at that time. They called themselves lords. And the people, when they got upset with their king, they went to the Anunnaki and said, hey, help us get rid of this guy. That's kind of interesting part of that story. My book that Mary and I wrote, called Gilgamesh 10, is a screenplay that tells the story in a movie fashion. It's a book, but it reads like a screenplay. And it's our interpretation of what it would have been like 4,600 years ago to be there, living in that coexistence with the Anunnaki.
Another audience question. If the Anunnaki were helping Hitler, why didn't the Nazis win?
Yeah, good question. I don't know the answer to that, but it appears to me that they were so technologically advanced to the rest of the world. How did they get all that technology? I mean, we had to go get their rocket engineers to create our space agency. They had all advanced technology. Why they didn't win is a good question. I don't know. But they certainly had the advanced tool. They could have won.
If the Anunnaki returned, do you think they'd like to meet Donald Trump? Do you think they'd get along with him?
I think they'd like him.
Well, they'd like his taste in gold, that's for sure.
Yeah, right. Well, you know, they were supposedly these tall, blue-eyed blondes.
Yeah, he'd like tall, blue-eyed blondes, that's for sure.
You know, the good question that you have your audience ask themselves is, you take towns like Cusco, and there were these places were just filled with gold. Where did it come from? You know, they weren't mining it. It was not a thing that was important to the Incas for them to go mine the gold. But there, nearby, there were washboard gold mining properties where I think the gold came from. And in every case, you say, well, Montezuma and the Aztecs, they had all this gold. Well, they were told by their god, Quetzalcoatl, that the gold belonged to the gods. They could use it to make art and so forth, but when the gods came back, you had to give it to us because it belonged to the gods. And they had tons and tons of gold, and when the conquistadors showed up, they said, okay, it's yours, you can have it. But the conquistadors were greedy, and they wanted more than what they were able to give them. It's a horrible story. But in the history of gold, you can't eat it. You can't make any workable tools out of it. It's too soft. It's pretty to look at, and it's hard to, get rid of it. Just you can sit there and admire it, but and it wouldn't be mining gold to eat it.
Question from the audience. Nibiru comes into our galaxy every 3,600 years. And when it does, it doesn't come close to Earth. It comes close to Mars, actually.
It goes between Jupiter and Mars, yeah.
There you go. This is all written in the Sumerian tablets, which were written 4,000 years before the Bible. I don't know if that's true. This is what the audience member is saying.
Yes, that is. Well, that's what's written by, translated by Sitchin.
So it doesn't crash into the Earth. It doesn't pass by and destroy the planet.
No, but what does happen is it's such a large gravitational body that its influence is magnified. Like if the moon, which is a fraction of the size of Nibiru, influences our tidal action, you can imagine what would happen to our tidal action if this thing comes close by. Also, it causes volcanic eruptions. And in fact, the Greeks named it Nemesis. They observed that it came through during their history, and they called it Nemesis because of the things that happened on planet Earth as a result of its passing. Gravitational impact is terrific.
Well, you're almost 88 years old. No offense, but you're coming to the end. What has been your greatest revelation?
That's a good question. As I look back on it, I think my discovery of the washboard gold mining theory, which answered the question of what was going on inside the Great Pyramid. Many people have tackled that puzzle and come up with all kinds of theories, but I think my Great Pyramid washboard gold mining theory, which I, by the way, have on my YouTube page as a YouTube, is a discovery that is got merit to it. You ask yourself when you're building this Great Pyramid, why do you do all the stuff you did inside of it and make it all watertight? It had to be watertight for a reason. And then the smoking gun is the damaged stone box that's found inside the king's chamber. All the outer edges of that box have been damaged after it was put in there. And my solution was that as the water churned up and bounced back and forth up through the grand gallery, finally got to the king's chamber, it floated this pristine box and banged it around on the ceiling and the walls inside the chamber, damaging its every outside edge. It's very visible. If you look closely at it, you'll see there's a huge amount of pounding that went on. And finally, one corner of the box was pounded down to the point where water got in it, and it sunk. And if that happened, that was the end of the washboard gold mining in the Great Pyramid. It's a very, I think, substantial theory that I've launched, and it's part of my total washboard gold mining contribution by the Anunnaki.
Will humanity ever be free of the Anunnaki, or will we always be linked?
My answer to that is we're always linked to them. They're like family.
So this is a shared planet?
Yes.
It's not ours?
No. It was given to us, supposedly, to take care of as part of the destiny. The destiny that the Anunnaki wrote about was that they were destined to come to this planet to create humanity and then turn it over to us, and it was our destiny to take care of it. We haven't done a very good job.
Well, I guess that's another good question then. Where do you see the planet 50 years from now, Marshall?
I don't know. That's a good question. I go one day at a time. I'm worried about where we're going tomorrow, if we're going to get 50 years out of it.
Are you not optimistic about the future?
Yeah, I am. I think that if we get ourselves into the worst situation, that they will show up and rescue us, prevent us from destroying the planet and ourselves. I think it's in their best interest to see that happen, and they've got the capability, I believe, of doing that. So I don't think that there's negativity involved. I'm very positive about our survival with their help.
Fascinating interview as always, Marshall. Tell us more about your books and where the audience can best purchase them.
Okay. The best place to get them is on my webpage, which is adamthemissinglink.com. They're also available at Amazon and Kindle, but I have them at the prices that are reduced from what those folks charge. So if you go to the second page of my website, adamthemissinglink.com, you'll find the 4 books there: Adam, the Missing Link, Gilgamesh 10, The Anunnaki Were Here, and The Mysteries of Ancient Technology.
Brilliant stuff. Marshall Klarfeld, thank you so much once again for being a guest on my program.
You're quite welcome, Russell, and have a good night.